don't know about you, watching recent news reports over the last year or so, these appalling stories of people living in disgustingly mouldy conditions in either private flats and houses or council flats and houses. Now, social landlords who keep damp and mouldy homes are going to be legally forced to investigate and fix problems inside 2 weeks, 14 days. That's the limit they've got, under a new law that's currently under consultation.
The move comes after the death of 2-year-old Awaab Ishak in December 2020 after prolonged exposure to mould in his home in Rochdale. But Labour says they would take the law further. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner is with us. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Angela Rayner, you want this to apply to all landlords, not just social landlords, but private landlords as well, which seems entirely reasonable.
Yeah, because we have 1.6 million children living in mouldy, damp or cold houses that are in the private sector as well. And you can't distinguish between social landlords and private landlords. If you're renting a property...
You mean social mould or private mould?
Yeah, mould is mould. And
yeah.
Obviously the tragic case of Awaab and what happened in Rochdale, and, you know, I'm a Greater Manchester MP, we can't have the conditions that we see at the moment. And people are really scared about that. You know, I've got relatives and friends who are too frightened to raise concerns about their landlord and the conditions of the house because they'll be made homeless through Section 21 notices, no-fault evictions, and therefore the kids can't get to school, they're placed outside of the borough and they're really frightened about the future for their family.
If you were in power and you put this law through, how would you enforce it? What would you do with a landlord who simply doesn't respond to letters telling him or her that they've got to fix the problem?
Well, there has to be enforcement, like we have in local authority at the moment, but the problem we've got is a real problem of supply as well. And therefore, many people, as I say, are too frightened even now, are living in homes that they know are not good for their health and the health of their children, but they equally know that if they raise these concerns and the local authority condemn the property, that they'll end up homeless. And the homeless crisis we have in the UK, because we've not been tackling supply, means that they'll end up out of boroughs. Some families are being taken 20, 30, even 200 miles away from where they live, and therefore the children can't go to their local school. If they're in work, they can't get to their job. So it has a real knock-on effect for people. So we've got to deal with the supply side of problems with the housing crisis as well.
Supply is the biggest issue. The government this morning, Minister for Housing, is going to say on this programme that people should be favoured for social housing if they have close connections to the UK and their local area, and applicants should be required to demonstrate a connection to the UK for at least 10 years and their local area for at least 2 years. They're going to overhaul the system. They're also going to do a 3 strikes and you're out policy for antisocial behaviour, and terrorists with certain convictions could also be blocked from living in social homes. British homes for British people, it's dubbed. Would you support that?
I think it's absolute rubbish because the government know that there isn't the housing there. 10 years, most people listening to the programme who are in private rented or who are homeless now, 10 years, it seems like an absolute stretch target for them to get housing when they're homeless, because the housing waiting lists are so significant and have got worse over the last 14 years that they can't give British homes for British people. They can't give any homes for people because the housing crisis is so acute. So this is absolute rubbish what they're coming out with at the moment, and it's gaslighting.
Okay. But you have to prioritise.
You
have to prioritise people. That is the purpose of the waiting lists, isn't it? So why would you have an objection to prioritising?
But even people this is what I'm saying. People who are at the highest priority cannot get homes. You ask any local authority, you ask any housing association at the moment, their waiting list, 10 years seems like a very reasonable target for most people at the moment, because we don't even have that possibility to give people the homes at the moment. When I was growing up, I lived in a council house. In them days, it was, oh, your council house, you're poor. Now, if you can get a council house, it's considered great real estate because you just can't get them anymore.
OK, what about the 3 strikes and you're out antisocial behaviour policy, or terrorists with certain convictions? I mean, it seems absolutely remarkable that neighbours who make next-door neighbours' lives hell are not treated or discriminated against. A 3 strikes and you're out policy surely would be something that you would
I'd really like to see
support.
where the government have seen that that's not happening and that isn't demonstrated, because actually what we see is there is powers at the moment and people are cracking down on things like antisocial behaviour. So again, to me, this is gaslighting. They're not dealing with the problems. And some of the issues around antisocial behaviour that they've said, for example, if you've got a newborn baby, that's now classed as antisocial behaviour if your baby's crying.
Is it?
Yes, that's one of the examples that was given for evictions of people.
Are you sure about
who have had... Yes, that was one of the examples when we've been looking at why landlords have removed people on antisocial behaviour is as somebody who's had a newborn baby and the baby was crying. Of course, antisocial behaviour has to be tackled. But the truth is that people at the moment are being dealt with. They've been dealt with unfairly through Section 21 no-fault evictions, which the government have promised for years to deal with, and they haven't. There's plenty of examples where families have been turfed out of their homes for no reason whatsoever, and there is no protections for them, and it's making the housing crisis even worse.
If you get into power, and the polls currently predict that you will, what would you do about housing stock? Because what we need is more houses.
Yeah, and that's why we said that we'd have planning reforms to make sure that we can speed up the process to get new homes.
Build on greenfield sites?
Well, we call it greyfield. There's brownfield sites, many brownfield sites at the moment that are being land grabbed and are not being developed, that we want to see that development. We'd enforce local authorities to have local plans as mandatory, which the government have removed that threshold to make sure that happens. And we'd get those houses built that we need to have built, because the supply in this country is the real crisis that we face.
Can we change the subject? Last time there was a vote on a ceasefire in Gaza, you abstained, didn't you? You didn't vote. But a lot's happened since then. There have been a lot more deaths in Gaza. If there was a vote on it today, would you still abstain or would you vote for a ceasefire?
I mean, the challenge that's happening in Gaza, no one can look at the TV and see what's happening. I'm a mother and a grandmother myself, and you see the devastation in Gaza. It's absolutely horrific.
So is that a yes? You would vote for a ceasefire?
We're very clear. We want to see a situation where Hamas gives the hostages... We still have over 130 hostages, people who were going about their daily business on the 7th of October, slaughtered, murdered and taken from their families. Their hostages need to be released, and we need to see a sustainable ceasefire, and we need to have that humanitarian aid getting into Gaza as quickly as possible. There isn't enough aid getting into Gaza at the moment,
on Friday,
and we're pushing for that.
On Friday, you were driven away in a police car after you and your colleague Jonathan Reynolds confronted by pro-Palestine supporters and campaigners. The groups heard shame on you, chanting. You'd been at a fundraising dinner in Stockport. That event was interrupted, and a woman was filmed shouting, "What kind of feminist are you? 15,000 women and children dead, and you tout yourself a modern-day feminist." There is strong feeling, isn't there?
And I understand that strong feeling. I would do everything I possibly could to stop what's happening in the Middle East.
On a ceasefire,
but that is not going to stop. Realistically, what we're trying to do at the moment is bring about a ceasefire, bring about the release of those hostages and bring about a two-state solution for that area. I would give everything to make that happen. I'm a mother myself. I've been, looking at what's happening in that region for many decades as a trade unionist, let alone as a Member of Parliament. I would do whatever it takes to get to that position. We are trying to do that. And in fairness, every single Member of Parliament wants to see that. I don't think there is any Member of Parliament in the UK that wants to see that. Can you just explain to those
protesters why you won't vote for it?
Because we're trying to bring about the situation by diplomacy, by working in the region. We've met with ambassadors, we've met with Palestinian families, we've met with the Israeli ambassador, we've met with the Palestinian ambassador. You think it would be an empty gesture, is what
you're saying, isn't it?
It's not going to make it happen.
What's your view on the South African attempt to have Israel condemned for genocide? What do you think of the use of the word genocide in relation to what's going on in Gaza right now, as we speak?
Well, I think the ICJ ruling is very serious, and I think it puts the marker down. It stopped, from actually saying that's where we're at the moment. But it was very clear that the humanitarian crisis we see at the moment unfolding in Gaza for the Palestinians is really serious.
Do you think there are aspects of genocide in the dictionary version of genocide?
I don't know. The ICJ is the right place for that to be determined. But it's very clear from what we're seeing, the reports we're getting, there is nowhere near enough humanitarian aid getting into Palestine at the moment, into Gaza. We have got to make sure that that aid gets to those people. There is millions of people at the moment that are in desperate need, and it is a humanitarian crisis that's unfolding. And therefore, we have to seriously, as an international community, and we are doing it, and in respect to the Prime Minister, he's pushing as well. David Cameron's been in the region, is pushing to ensure that we get that humanitarian aid where it is needed so desperately at the moment.
Let's just bring our attention back to the big stories today, the rail strikes. People utterly fed up with not being able to rely on trains running at all.
Yeah, mine was cancelled yesterday.
Right. Why is this dragging on? And if you get into power, how would you fix it?
Well, there's a number of issues there, and you'll have heard from the Trade Union General Secretary on the driver shortages and some of the issues that the train operating companies have failed to address.
Would you
and that's
pay
coming
them
home
more?
to roost.
Would you up it from 4%? That's the latest offer.
So what we need to do is get round the table. There's more. It's much more than just about pay, actually. There's stuff around the contracts that they're given, around flexibility, which, you know, my new deal for working people is around making sure we do have flexibility. It's all about recruitment as well. They haven't been recruiting the train drivers.
So unlike the current government, you would actually get into face-to-face negotiations on day one, would you?
We would absolutely get into negotiations. We know we've got a train driver shortage. That's part of the problem. Is it's the train operators work on goodwill of the drivers doing overtime and doing more than their contracted hours. We need to have more train drivers, and we need to tackle some of the issues. You do that by getting around the table.
OK.
Susanna mentioned the polls that are so favourable to Labour at the moment. Now, you've been so far ahead for so long. I've never seen polls like them, actually. It must be very hard for you not to start pre-celebrations, because unless something spectacularly unexpected happens, you're going to win.
Well, I've seen in politics how things can be incredibly unpredictable, actually, and how polls that are very high can suddenly shrink. We're under no illusion that we have to fight for every single vote. And for me, what we're doing at the moment, and what I've been trying to do, is make sure that when the tyres hit the tarmac, we hit the ground running. So that when I promise 1.5 million homes to deal with the housing shortage we've got in this country, that my plan can work. And we've been working really hard on that as a shadow cabinet, to be a cabinet in waiting, to be serious and say, you know, I understand the problems you face, because that was the problem we had in 2019. We wasn't talking about the things that the electorate wanted to hear. And also, we've got a plan to be able to deliver for that.
But given the polls, you must be very excited. I mean, you've been out of power now since, what, 2010. You must be very excited.
No, I'm very concerned that every day that goes by at the moment, we're seeing the chaos. I mean, we're seeing this chaos of who's going to be leader next and all this infighting. Now, I can tell you from my experience in the Labour Party, when we were all infighting, we wasn't looking outwards at the voters, and they gave us a big kicking, because at times when it's really serious, and it is serious for people, when all you're doing is fighting each other, you're not doing the job of government. So we're tackling the job of being, you know, a government in waiting, so that people can see we're going to tackle the issues that matter to them.
You don't want to make a misstep, do you?
No.
Not this close.
Would you bring the trains back into public ownership, like Sir Keir Starmer pledged when he ran for leader?
Yeah, but we'll do it when... We will, but we'll do it when the contracts are up. We're not going to spend money on trying to get those contracts back. We'll look at regulation, we'll look at how we can work with the trade. Avanti West Coast, quite frankly, at the moment have been given contracts and they don't deliver on the minimum that those contracts were meant to deliver. We will, when those contracts are up, we will take them back.
I don't know. When are those contracts up?
Well, it depends. It's different. It varies. Avanti West Coast, for example, has not been able to fulfil their contract, and the government have just extended it. So...
OK, so you'll renationalise the railways.
Yes.
He also pledged to do that with energy, the Royal Mail and water. Would you do it with those services as well?
Well, we've said that, you know, we haven't got a huge pot of money to just keep going, buying all these companies up. We've said about water, we need better regulation. Steve Reid, our shadow minister in that area, has been really clear and hard on that.
Water.
We've been very clear about the national grid is not fit for purpose at the moment. We can't get projects, big infrastructure projects, so we'd reform that to make sure it's working effectively. And Great British Energy, which is about making us energy efficient and secure and bringing down bills by having those renewables.
Well, lots more to talk to you about.
Where would you raise the money from?
Yeah.
in terms of the...
Any of this public spending?
Well, we've said that in terms of infrastructure projects, like when you get a house, you get a mortgage, that we would borrow for big infrastructure projects, but only on the fiscal rules that meant for every pound we borrowed, we'd bring in £3 into the economy.
Borrowing.
Even the CBI have said that our plans are better for the economy.
Tax? Higher taxes?
Well, you can't. I mean, you can't keep raising taxes. We've got the
Even
highest
on those
tax
with the
burden.
broadest shoulders?
We've got the highest tax burden for a generation.
Yeah. But what about those who could afford to pay more?
People can't afford to pay more at the moment.
No income tax
well,
increases.
we will. I mean, we've said about the non-dom tax status to put 10,000 more NHS doctors and nurses into our NHS. We've talked about the VAT on schools so that we can put more teachers and more money into our schools. So there is some tax differences, but ordinary people in this country are taxed far too much.
What did you make of the government minister who's resigned from his job because he says £118,000 isn't enough for him to pay his mortgage?
Well, it's all relative, isn't it, Richard? I mean, I would say that you're probably going to have to do what many people are facing because they damaged the economy and people's mortgages are going up. People are going to have to downsize, or they're going to have to, as government ministers have said to other people, get a job with more money. That's what they say to others. I mean, the challenge that minister faced was because of his government's doing, but, you know, it's relative. Everybody's got bills to pay.
Angela Rayner, thank you very much indeed
for coming in.
Good to see you this morning.
Thank you.